Oh, there's the Aspen tone that tells us we are ready to start. I'm John Dickerson of CBS News. I will introduce our panel in a second, but I was fascinated to learn that in doing the research for this panel that in 1935, the U.S. Forest Service had something that was called the 10 a.m. policy. And that meant that any new wildfire had to be suppressed by 10 a.m. the following day. Now, this was a simple idea that they tried to carry out. And of course, the more successful they were, the more fuel that gathered that was then available for the kinds of wildfires that we now have. But that's obviously not the only part of the story. Climate change has changed things so much that we went from 1935, in which you could put out fires by 10 a.m. the next day, to a time more recently where the Los Angeles Times had a headline that said, "Wildfire in the West has become an uncontrollable force." 5 of the worst 5 fires have taken place in the United States have taken place in the last decade. So we have now a much different situation of mega fires, and all of our panelists have had to deal with that in one form or another. And we are in this interesting moment where people used to talk about there was really nothing you could do, but some of the technology we'll talk about today might in fact beat that back. The striking thing about natural disasters that are fires is it's, I think, the only one, unlike hurricanes and floods and tornadoes, where we rush to try to stop it. Nobody goes running into a tornado to try to mitigate it, but of course we do with fires. So let me tell you who our panelists are. Sonia Kastner is the CEO of Pano AI, which uses advanced technology to detect and monitor wildfires across millions of acres. John Mills, who's at the very end, is the founder of Watch Duty, which is a real-time wildfire alert app. Alberto Carvalho is the superintendent of the Los Angeles Public School, Unified Los Angeles Public School District, and was also had that job for 14 years in Miami. And Saket Soni leads Resilience Force, which takes transforms disaster recovery into work for immigrants and immigrant communities in America. Superintendent Carvalho, let me go to you first. You just had to manage the Los Angeles fires. Will you tell us what that was like?
Sure. Well, truly, and I've been saying this for a number of years, it's been an unprecedented year for us. And for the past 5 years since COVID, every year seems to have been a year without a prior precedence, right? But just think about this for a second, and I know everybody monitored this through the news, unless you were in California and you were living it real time. Think about 3, 4, 5, at 1.6 simultaneous fires occurring in different sectors of the city, wrapped around hurricane force winds. That is a reality that, number one, there is no forecast model for. Secondly, it certainly tested the resource availability and strategy of city and county. And I'm not going to talk about that too much because that's been heavily debated, particularly through political lenses in terms of media coverage. But what ended up happening was, and I'm going to detail for you, 24 hours, 2 main fires, one impacting the Altadena area, the Eden Fire, and the other in Palisades. It was very clear the night before the vast expansion of the fire that we all went to sleep thinking that these fires maybe were on the verge of being contained. We were not anticipating closing schools. The information we were getting mainly through county data, the county dashboard, did not indicate that we should do anything out of the ordinary, other than put some schools on the band closest to the Altadena area on notice that perhaps we would need to start school later than usual to afford us time to perhaps suspend classes. Overnight, things changed dramatically. By 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, it was a completely different scenario where the fires had intensified. I think it is now well known that the notification systems did not necessarily operate the way they should have. People, particularly in the Altadena area, were not evacuated as quickly as they should have. And to make matters worse, the air quality indicators that provide information, real-time information to the entire community that we depend on. It's not just a matter of the fire threat. You may have a fire in the Palisades, and that one, based on the direction of the wind empties out onto the ocean, westward. But the Eaton fire in Altadena, all that smoke came onto the city. So areas far away from the city, because of the intensity of the winds, created a set of conditions that forced us to actually shut down the entire school system. The problem was we were robbed of precious time in terms of making early decisions based on two things. Number one, the unpredictability of conditions, direction of fire, direction of smoke, and the propagation of smoke over the community. LA, unlike Miami, Miami is flat. LA, the topography is very different. The smoke will go in different directions, and the smoke may linger with particulate matter at unacceptable levels for a long period of time in certain areas. So we had to shut down the school system. And of course, as you probably know, schools in the Pasadena area were compromised, and we had 3 schools in the Palisades. Palisades High, 30% burnt. Marquez Elementary, 100% burned, and Palisades Elementary, 75% burned. And the trauma was considerable. We had to evacuate, obviously, those school populations, but the good news story here is 3 silver lining examples that emanated from this tragedy. Number one, we were able to move the entire school populations from the burned down schools to new sites as an entire community, the principals, the support staff, the teachers, and all the students into existing schools. Maintaining the integrity of the school was important within 3 days. But we had about 17 schools that had to be evacuated for a prolonged period of time, particularly because of threats of the fire, but also air quality conditions. We were able to mobilize very quickly and default to online learning, even though it's not my preferred methodology. We learned it through the pandemic. That is a methodology we can default to during these times of crisis. We stood up a compassion fund that generated millions of dollars to provide to those who lost their homes within our school system and direct support to the communities. And we galvanized community interest in terms of supporting the recovery, leading to the appropriation just 2 months ago of $650 million to rebuild all 3 schools in an expedited way, working in collaboration with the governor, with the mayor, with the private sector, to cut through the red tape and really build better. Build more resilient schools, pay closer attention to trade wind directions, modify the way we build schools, materials used, and the location of the school to be more resilient in terms of adaptation to these conditions.
So when you tell me the story about, well, you have a special Aspen connection. Will you tell us about that as you introduce us to Pano AI?
Sure, and I just also wanted to say that watching the LA fires was just a tremendous shock and wake-up call, even to those of us who work on wildfire every day. I think it was a story experience that showed us that even with all the progress we've made over 5 years of this industry, we have so much more to go. And thank you for the work you're doing. Pano AI is a company that has an early wildfire detection and intelligence solution. It starts with deploying a network of mountaintop cameras. There are actually 4 of them surrounding us in Aspen. And that is thanks to Chief Ballantyne, who is here today. Can you wave, Chief Ballantyne? As well as the donor for the project was Aspen philanthropist Jerry Hosier of the Dora Hosier Center. So they had the crazy idea to be the first customer of a brand new startup back in 2021. And now, 5 years later, we have hundreds of camera systems across 10 states in the US, 5 states in Australia, BC, Canada, and hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts, monitoring 30 million acres of land. And the problem that we solve is that the traditional approach for detecting and providing the earliest intelligence on a fire is relying on humans as the sensor. And unfortunately, humans are not a very good sensor. Humans say, I'm driving down the freeway and I see some smoke on my left. And only 1 in 20 of those 911 calls are actually a real fire that requires action. And they haven't provided sufficient information for a response. So the city who gets that call sends out a city fire engine to drive around chasing ghosts. A couple hours later, maybe they've actually come across a real vegetation fire, and they radio back and say, oh, please send resources. And then there's a long, slow, gradual process of escalating up the chain to get the state agency to send the planes, helicopters, bulldozers, and that's when the real attack begins, hours later. Pano's solution speeds up every step of that process. We rotate the cameras every minute. We also ingest satellite data. We use computer vision combined with human in the loop as well to detect and confirm the fire within minutes. And we have we have a team of former firefighters that actually goes and onboards city, county, state, and federal agencies in advance of fire season. So when we confirm there is a fire, we notify all the agencies simultaneously. And we push out alerts with location and imagery. And a picture speaks 1,000 words. So all those agencies immediately start collaborating, and they can start their aggressive response potentially hours earlier. And we've had many examples of successes here where fires have been contained, avoiding catastrophe.
And I want to ask you about those successes and why speed really matters. John, let's attach you though, because you can help us explain what Watch Duty does. But first, I want to understand where the idea came, how it came to you.
Yeah, Watch Duty came to me like many people who've been through fires. They realize that there are problems. What we just experienced in Lahaina, in Greenville, in Tubbs, in Altadena is the same problem that I experienced back in 2019. I moved off the grid, left Silicon Valley to lead a different life, and I wanted to bring technology to others who are underprivileged and underserved. I was a month into living there, and all of a sudden there's a helicopter circling over my house. And I think nothing of it. I think it's just CAL FIRE just doing a training mission of some sort. I know nothing about wildland fire at this point. And then another one shows up with a bucket on the bottom. And that's when I was like, all right, there's a fire nearby. What I learned later, because I've done my wildland fire training, is that fires burn uphill, smoke travels with the wind, also burns uphill, the fire is above me, I smell nothing, I hear nothing but the rotor wash of helicopters over my head. So being the probably stupid Boy Scout that I am, as I grabbed my hose and started wetting my house down, rather than getting out of there, the helicopter operator is yelling at me to get the hell out, and I refused to leave at that point in time. All the helicopters clear, and a C-130 tanker, massive tanker, flies over my house, and I turn around and I watch the bomb bay doors open up and retardant fly out of it, and that's when I was like, holy crap, my neighbor's house is on fire. Their ranch is on fire. Interestingly enough, all the tankers left, helicopters left. There was no noise, no sirens, no alert, no news, no nothing, like it didn't happen. And I drove up there in my car, and I saw the house just completely painted in the pink retardant that you see. And there's one engine there, and I'm like, well, I guess this is what I'm in for now. So I have many more stories of it happening to me, but that's the one that really made me realize that I was on my own out there, and I had to do something about the problem.
Saket, before I ask you about the technical aspects of what Resilience Force does, can you tell me what you have come to believe, spending so much time in these areas of disaster? It doesn't necessarily just have to be fires, because I know you started out with Hurricane Katrina, but just the kind of human picture that you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I lead an organization called Resilience Force, and it emerged out of the post-Hurricane Katrina Gulf Coast. Katrina damaged or destroyed 1 million homes in Mississippi, 1 million more in Louisiana, and the people who came to rebuild those homes were largely itinerant immigrant workers. For the next 19 years, hard to believe, but Katrina was 19 years ago, 20 years in August. For the next 19, 20 years, I followed those workers. My team and I embed with those workers as they've traveled from hurricane to hurricane, from storm to flood, from city to town, first across the Gulf Coast and then crisscrossing country, and evolved into a full-blown workforce. So our work is to take that workforce, not only protect it, but professionalize it, and recruit a lot more people to it. And this comes to one key insight we've gained from 20 years in disasters, that we're living in an era of disaster, and if we have any shot at resilience, it's going to need human labor. It's going to need people, right? The second thing is we were invited to Sonoma County, where you live, to do fire-related work, and there we really learned that you can build an extraordinary workforce and pay high wages out of the labor of prevention, particularly fire prevention. So that's our big focus around fires. My friends up here have talked about fire detection, fire tracking, fire suppression, fire management. We work on prevention before the fires.
Well, and Sonia, when I was doing the research about, this idea that some people have talked about that you just like these fires are just too big and too overwhelming, I was also struck by or help us understand if you see the smoke and get there, the massive fire never happens. Give us an understanding of how the advantage of early warning, how much of an advantage that gives you.
Absolutely. I'd love to give one of those examples, and also I'd also love to talk to what you opened with around this problem of oversuppression too, because we help with that as well. One of our great examples was right here in Colorado last year, the Bear Creek fire. This is July of 2024. Our systems detected wisps of smoke from the start of a fire in a remote area outside of Denver, and we detected it from 2 cameras, so we were able to pinpoint the location very precisely, and it was in a remote canyon without road access, in a watershed that served millions of people. And this is your worst nightmare scenario, because when you don't have road access, it makes it even harder to battle that fire. But we had early intelligence, so we alerted multiple agencies, and Douglas County started to collaborate with the U.S. Forest Service immediately and decided they would send in 30 U.S. Forest Service firefighters on foot, as well as 2 helicopters from Douglas County collaborating. They dropped 56 drops of water over 9 hours, and 30 firefighters fought the fire on foot. They contained it to just 3 acres, which is a non-event. And so it's a fire you never hear about that could have been a major catastrophe. Now, we at Pano with cameras and AI, we don't stop fires. We just provide actionable intelligence. And sometimes that intelligence says, even though it's a naturally caused fire, we should let that fire burn. Right. If the conditions are mild, and this is a part of the natural healthy fire cycle, we can safely manage that fire and let it burn. There's a third type of fire, which those of you who are from Aspen would be very familiar with, which is controlled fires. There's tens of thousands of permitted controlled fires in the U.S. every year, and Chief Ballantyne implemented a very successful controlled fire. I believe it was on Red Mountain, right next to where we are here just a few months ago, where they used Pano's camera systems to make sure the fire stayed in the permitted area. And so we need to put more healthy fire back on the landscape. And when we were hunter-gatherers, the tribal communities would set fire and they would just move out of the way. We can't do that anymore. So we need to do these permitted burns, and Pano Solution would be a really powerful tool for that as well.
John Mills, when Watch Duty democratizes fire information, explain how that works in real use cases.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm in like the dissemination business, where what Sonia and Pano does is detection, right? So I don't look for fires. We listen to once the fire gets toned out. So the work that Sonia and others do to detect fires triggers our team to start our work of tracking, listening to the fires. And it's a very strange model that most people will not believe works, but it does, and it doesn't use AI to do it. So when I started going through large mega fires, especially the next one that came the following year in 2020 when the sky turned orange in the west, if anyone remembers that, in California, I had to evacuate my ranch. 50,000 acre fire ended at the corner of my property. And I was on Facebook and Twitter trying to find real information because, as our superintendent here pointed out, the government is not the best at putting out actionable intelligence even for the government itself to use. And so I started listening to fire service radios myself, and then I started to realize that there are people on Facebook and Twitter who are spending day and night listening to radios. That is how the fire is fought, with shovels and radios. So we intersect ourselves into that process and listen day and night. Now I have 200 volunteers and about 15 paid staff that have built essentially a distributed Office of Emergency Services. We hear and listen to the fire activities on the fire ground as it happens. Because believe it or not, there are no satellites tracking in real time. There is not a Starlink on every fire truck. And even in my county that's very populated, there are ravines and drainages where first responders can't even get a radio communication out of the drainage. So it is extraordinarily primitive, but we have taken that information, put it in an app that you can download for free on the App Store, by the way. We are a nonprofit. And now it's become the #1 app in the App Store multiple times, and this is now how the government uses the information themselves. Every time I meet a helitack pilot, tanker pilot, dozer operator, emergency manager, I just met one in here in the room, I don't know where you are, but they all use Watch Duty as well. And so it didn't occur to me when I built this for the civilians that the government didn't have what they need. And now I realize that we are here to help everybody, and we do it at no cost to the world.
Superintendent Carvalho, you gave a thumbs up to that. How much does early detection, does clarity of information change the game for you? And what lessons did you learn that you are implementing to make sure when this happens again?
Yeah. So number one, we are users. My team is an aggressive user of Watch Duty, and we get vital information on a timely basis that allow us to not only engage in some degree of prediction, but also real-time pivot, which is important. On the basis of what we know now, what do we need to modify in terms of our action? Look, here are the learnings. Number one, and you mentioned it, and you as well. It was very, very apparent that the county's own dashboard, which was populated by sensors throughout the community, stopped working effectively. I think it was designed for maybe 1, 2 events, not designed for 5, 6 simultaneous events. As I said, with a wind phenomenon that was totally uncharacteristic for Southern California. So I believe that system crashed. The system itself, the electronics did not necessarily crash, but the data was compromised. That was my first learning. We will never be in that position alone. Now, thankfully, we approved the $9 billion massive, largest general obligation bond back in November. Automatically, we diverted $1.2 billion to be invested not only into the rebuilding of schools, but also next generation detectors to be on top of every one of our schools. And that's perfect to be used not only by us, but by the entire community. No other agency in Los Angeles has a presence like the school system. 1,100 schools, over 720 square miles, meaning we are everywhere. So one or more sensors on top of every school that detect not only air quality, particulate matter in the air, noxious fumes and gases, but also wind speeds can generate a multi-dimensional picture of the entire community, allowing us, using to a certain extent AI, to make better predictions than the data that we were getting. The second learning is the fact that, LAUSD has been around for many years, for over a century. And we have a lot of schools that are very old. Actually, the older buildings are more fire resilient than schools that were built later on in many instances. So we've learned a lot in terms of materials, how schools should be built, constructed, making huge investments into the new design, prototypical design, and material selection for the rebuilding of schools. Thirdly, and this goes a bit to the points made by the three of you, I think this is a terrific opportunity to really use it as a real-time science, a learning experiment for the benefit of our kids. You ought to, I mean, if you didn't believe in climate change and the effect, this is an example that you can learn from. Yeah. If you didn't know about what the winds in Southern California are like or the influence they may have, this is an example to learn from. If you didn't know that fires is not a new thing in Southern California, is a cyclical thing, good example to learn. If you want to learn about architecture, design, engineering, and building, how sometimes for the sake of a great view, you built the house in the wrong place, good time to learn. So we're using that also as an opportunity of learning from this tragedy.
Sure. And the idea that sometimes you have to set a fire to stop a fire is good counterintuitive teaching for
At many levels,
kids.
including politically speaking.
Yeah. Saket, would you, I want to ask you at some point about immigration policy, but we're not going to do that just yet. But I don't want you to think that I'm not going to, because it's obviously crucial to what your workforce is all about. But I'm interested in the resilience that you were talking about. What is it like? What is a workforce that is skilled and taught how to build resilience? What does that look like? What do they do?
Yeah, let me describe it. So, when we got to Sonoma County, what we found after the day without sunlight, the day the sky turned orange and 5 years of fires, what we found was people knew fire prevention was needed. People knew it, right? People weren't in the old days of thinking about fires only when the first fire hit. Now people were, half an hour into the movie Jaws. They know the threats out there. Everyone's afraid, right? The music's playing, the famous music, right? But there were two myths we had to dispel. One was that fire prevention work, all it is clearing brush. Mm-hmm. You just clear it and you're good. And the second myth was that it's like mowing your lawn. You do it on a Sunday, or at most it's a summer job for a kid. You should do it on a Sunday. It should be a summer job for a kid. But if that's all it is, you'll never get to scale in fire prevention. So what we did was deeply understand fire behavior and translate the labor needs around resilience into a skill set that you can train through an apprenticeship program, and then hire people into not low-paid jobs, but high-paid jobs, and jobs on which you can stack jobs and more jobs to create careers, right? So what's the work? The work is, there's two types of work. One is land management or land stewardship. It's not just clearing brush. It's an entire range of interventions in the ecology. Working with nature rather than opposing nature. An example of it that we were just talking about that we have a great love for is gully stuffing. When rains come, heavy rains slice gullies downhill, right? What happens then is, because of how fast the water is rushing, the water never is able to seep into the soil. And that means that, there's a reduced amount of moisture. That means that it's more fire risk, there's more fire risk than if the water had seeped in. So there's a way of putting logs down, right, to change the way water flows, to slow down the flow, to let it seep in. That's just one way of intervening. It requires not just stamina and strength, but an actual amount of skill, ecological awareness, awareness of nuance and skill. So there's things like that come under land stewardship, land management. And then there's a second category of work that our workers are doing called home hardening. And that's not just retrofitting homes with more resistant materials. It's also making sure there's space around homes between the vegetation and the home to create what's called defensible space to make sure embers don't fly. So that's sort of the work. Now, what we are doing is taking people who are unemployed or underemployed and training them into that work to create careers. And I just want to say, just building on what the superintendent said, we just got invited to the city of LA to build something at scale to make the large, vast, wildland urban interface more fire resistant, more fire resilient. And fire resilience is one, of course, outcome of this labor, of this human labor. But another outcome can actually be that this is the way communities feel and, in fact, do take back control after they've lost it, right? Imagine if the students in your schools returned to those schools and, building on what you said, not just learned the science, but actually went back into a more harmonious relationship with the nature right around those schools, doing land stewardship work. That's the vision we have.
Mm. John, does Watch Duty, because people are now habituated to using it, help with the mindset change that needs to happen? As Saket was saying, it's not just to hire the kid for a couple of days. You have to be more mindful about resilience in your house, where you build houses. Has Watch Duty's use changed the mindset a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think what can be measured can be improved, right? And what Sonia was pointing out earlier, like we have to put more fire in the landscape. It used to be a part of our natural ecology, and we have eradicated it, and now we have fuel loads that are extraordinarily dangerous. And so when we first started, we didn't do any of this. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't realize we'd be as big as we are. But as it started to progress, we realized that there were all these prescribed burns that were happening, and then people were calling 911. I know the chief knows this well. It's like constant phone calls. There's a fire. You're like, yes, I know, that's a good fire. Constant phone calls. And so then we started working with state and local and federal agencies, parks, all sorts of folks who are now publishing their data on Watch Duty, and the 911 calls are now dropping. So real calls can go through. It's also democratizing the information, making people feel safer. I meet people in the post office, a supermarket. They will hug me. They will say, I saw a fire this morning, John, and I looked and I watched you today. I knew I didn't have to be worried about it. So like, it's this collective trauma that's just killing people. And so that's just one small example of how we are helping to do that. But like, there's so much more to do. We need a more resilient workforce, more resilient buildings. We need more detection. Like, we're only one part of the ecological system of fire. So before I pass the microphone, there's something to think about here in this room, right? There's like, when people say wildfire or the fire problem, you're like, well, what do you mean? Is it insurance? Is it detection? Is it suppression? Is it living with it? Is it the workforce? It's a very, very big industry, and there's really no silver bullet to any of it. So all of us are a part of this ecosystem of making us more resilient to this world that's changing underneath us.
Alberto, is there a resilient piece to the mental health of the kids who went through the LA fires or who live in the threat of these kinds of events happening that teachers have to think about, that school districts have to think about?
I think it's a reality we all have to think about and consider and support. I mean, these are the same communities, right, that went through the pandemic and then went through the first ever threat of a hurricane in Los Angeles. Think about that, first ever threat of a hurricane in Los Angeles. Coming from Florida, I somehow felt that something followed me.
Yeah.
Or it could be the other way.
Maybe.
You brought it with you.
Right. And then, of course, the fires and now political fires. I know you want to talk immigration. There's a great deal of trauma in the community, impacting more often than not the most fragile amongst us. It is hard sometimes for kids to decode, to understand what is happening around them. So we ventured into that space. We actually put out a lot of resources to our teachers, to support our teachers, and the parents, to the Family Academy, the Parent Academy, to help parents try to make sense of the incomprehensible for the kids, beginning with, do acknowledge that something did happen, don't lie, right? Whether we're talking about the COVID, the loss of family members, fires, the impact, lost your home, you lost your school, and in many cases, thousands of my kids lost their home and their school. Their entire reality was uprooted. So you better believe that there is systemic and very personalized trauma that kids are living with. That's why we've overly resourced the kids. We had to move to the new schools with additional school psychologists, psychiatric social workers, a lot of investment in terms of peer counseling, training for the teachers themselves, because the teachers themselves lost homes and now are the caretakers, the emotional caretakers of kids who lost everything. So we had to provide a training program and support system for the teachers, for the students, for the parents. And by the way, the community, solidified around us. I mean, it was very easy to reach out to Disney and to the private sector and say, hey, this is your community, this is the time to invest now. And I think, by the way, that was an equally important investment to the capital investments that we made in terms of resilience and building. Yeah. The social emotional support, the mental health supports for not only the kids, the workforce, but also the parents has been critically important. And it's not a one and done. This, I believe, is a support that needs to be in place for a long period of time.
Sonia, let me ask you about private industry and how it may use what Pano AI does. I could imagine, well, I know you work with electric companies, right? Or electric utilities. And I could also imagine insurance companies. Is this shoot this down, of course. But if I'm an insurance company that's thinking about getting out of California, many already have. But if I can mitigate the risk by knowing that fires are going to be faster to knock out, maybe I don't leave, maybe the rates get affected. Is that something you work with?
So absolutely. So just, I think last week, my co-founder Arvin and Chief Ballantyne were here in this exact Aspen Institute campus hosting an insurance summit around the way that wildfire technology could make communities insurable. So for us, we actually just raised a round of funding, and 2 insurers became investors in Pano, Liberty Mutual and Tokyo Marine. They are not customers. The reason insurers are not customers is because Pano's camera systems cover a 10-mile radius, and that means they cover they cover homes that are insured by many different insurers. So there's kind of a tragedy of the commons problem where insurers are not directly buying the camera systems themselves, but they're investing in us, and they are convening to start talking about how can they bake the risk reduction into their actuarial models. And actually, Chief Ballantyne was the first fire chief to put Pano into his ISO application. This is sort of a nerdy technical thing, but insurers really care about these ISO applications. Your ISO score determines your insurance rates. You may not know this for your community. And
it's like a FICO for housing?
Yeah, basically. And so, the old school way of determining your fire insurance risk was how many blocks were you to the fire station. We need better models than that. We need to look at, and it's not just technology, it's also the work Satchit is doing as well. There are many mitigations that are starting to be rolled out in innovative areas across the country, both technological and non-technological, that really do lower the risk. And if insurers can start to quantify that, then we will see premiums come down in the areas that have implemented those mitigations, and we'll see areas tip from uninsurable to insurable. And that's a critical goal we must set.
Saga, you've described your workforce as the white blood cells. Now that I gather is the workforce that comes in after the disaster happens.
That's right.
But so you've got 2 workforces here. I don't know what the biological equivalent is to whatever good thing happens before you run into a bad thing. But will you help us understand how immigration policy affects your workforce, whether it's in resilience before the fire arrives or in the white blood cell role after it arrives?
Sure. Well, the workers who rebuilt the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina were largely immigrant workers. Most of them were undocumented. And as they traveled and they went to new cities, they acquired 2 things. They acquired an extraordinary skill set. They became highly skilled. And they also acquired a deep sense of vocation. They came to be really purposeful and committed around this work. A deep sense of the role they were playing, not just building a house, but in the lives of the families. Now, the tragedy that the superintendent described, you lose your home, your child loses school. If you're the one coming in and helping that family get back on their feet, that's a deeply emotional process. And the possibility of a bond starts to emerge. And what we saw was that immigrant workers were coming in storm after storm, rebuilding the homes of people who right before the storm thought they hated immigrants. And then they would say thank you. They would bring them water. They would celebrate crews of workers after the completion of the repair job. And our work was to build on that and transform those spontaneous connections into a basis of building social cohesion, building the social fabric that this country needs. We've done crews that bring non-immigrants and immigrants together in North Carolina, people who voted against immigrants and then worked right with immigrants, shoulder to shoulder, rebuilding homes. And that's because right after a disaster, whether a fire or a hurricane, the fundamental problem you're facing changes. Your highest order problem in your life is not immigration policy. It's how to get your community back. And we're building on that. Now, we don't take a view on immigration policy, but we do believe that when a workforce is needed, it's just needed. It's true for farm workers. It's also true for this new workforce that we're calling the resilience workforce. And we think about the contribution we're making as a building block of a safe American society. And so that's the approach we take to immigration policy is, where are the workers going to come from who are going to do not just the rebuilding, but this vast exercise of prevention work that needs to be done in LA or Sonoma or Northern California? Who is going to do it? And it's not only immigrants. In LA, our partnership with the city envisions training the unhoused, the formerly incarcerated, young workers, the structurally unemployed, so that there's really a multiracial, multicultural workforce doing this work.
John, what's the biggest puzzle you're trying to solve right now of the marginal next challenge to make Watch Duty better or more adaptable or more used?
Yeah, I mean, we are not finished with the features we're going to be building for wildland firefighters and citizens alike, but we didn't put fire in the name on purpose. This talk is about fire, but I'm going to tell you what the future is we're going to build the emergency alerting system the government failed to build, nationally and then globally. So next up for us is floods this winter. My community goes from fires to floods. LA went to landslides immediately after that. And this is the recurring problem. And if you squint a little bit and try and imagine there not being a fire for a second, around the corner is an unseen disaster. I don't know what it is. Is it a tsunami? Is it a hurricane? I don't know what it is, but I don't know all the information that I need. And I see the same pattern throughout all these disasters. Lack of intelligence gets people killed. It also freaks people out. So I'll leave one anecdote about the earthquake problem that we just saw in Northern California. There was a small earthquake off the coast of Arcata, which is like a 5-point something, not too big for California. It's kind of like a joke. LA, you're like, whatever. It's a bus driving by. But it was a small earthquake. And for some reason, the local government in Berkeley and parts of Oakland freaked out and sent emergency alerts to people, told them to get to higher ground and pack their cars. So if you understand the Bay Area, you know that, I guess I can't do this well, but it's north of the Bay. The tsunami wave would have to somehow circle around under the Golden Gate Bridge and then wipe out Berkeley. But people, like friends of mine, were calling me because they know that we're watching all this stuff, packed their cars, drove up the hill, and were freaking out and calling everyone, calling dispatch centers, overloading systems. 25 minutes later, the government publishes a retraction. My friends in Ocean Beach got their surfboards and went out.
Yeah.
Right? This is a problem. And we know that because we watch the ocean buoys. We're like, what's going to happen here? We're like, get the boards out. This is going to be fun. And meanwhile, people are panicking. So, like, it's not the government's fault. It's just no one is really thinking about this problem from a first principled human perspective and boiling it down to what we actually need from a human's perspective, not what the government thinks you should know.
Just very quickly, does that help then with things like evacuations where we saw all the cars stopped in the middle of the road?
Yes, we do. We publish all the evacuation zones. We have them all from LA, and we get those from the government as well. We try not to step on too many toes. We step on a lot of toes. But it's a dangerous thing that we're doing, right? Because if you're screaming fire in a crowded room, you have real issues.
Yeah.
But there's this idea somehow that we know where the evacuation zones are or the routes are, but we got to remember, and I've been asked this by so many citizens, tell me how to get out. And I can't do that because it takes one car careening, blocking that road, and no satellite, no data provider. Nobody knows that. It is extraordinarily dangerous to think that Silicon Valley tech is going to go figure out that 3 minutes ago, that lady just blocked the only exit out because her car crashed.
Right. But if you start earlier, you don't need...
That is the point.
That's
correct.
The point.
Early warning. That's right.
Sonia, what's the puzzle you're trying to solve right now? What's the marginal challenge in the future?
Sure. Well, our immediate focus, we just raised a funding round. Our immediate focus is, first of all, scaling to meet the growing demand, because the solution is now proven that when you can, just like with the way we treat cancer, just if you can detect early, get to it faster, you can contain it while it's still small. So first of all, we're working to scale across the US, Canada, Australia. And then on a product perspective, it's a funny thing. we've gotten really good at catching fires. Our product is fundamentally a fire smoke detector, and we then push it to the fire department to let them make a judgment on whether it's actionable. And in the first couple of minutes of a fire, you really can't tell the difference between whether that is a campfire or the start of a vegetation fire. And in fact, during fire season, even that campfire might be illegal because there's a burn ban, and so the fire department wants to know about that too. What we have found is we are alerting on an incredibly high number of fires. It's amazing how much stuff is on fire if you have such a sensitive detection system. So a lot of our R&D investment right now is figuring out, and actually we're borrowing from areas of software called the software field of observability, PagerDuty, Datadog, practices around who within the fire community needs to get what level of alert at what speed, at what level of certainty, to make sure that you're balancing both the urgency of the response, but also not overwhelming every single fire agent, fire professional with every single alert. And then we're also working to provide more situational awareness once the fire has been detected, so they can inform the response. So is there a red flag warning in the area? What other assets are nearby? What are landmarks nearby? What are other resources nearby, previously burned zones? We have a huge amount of features coming down the pike related to those two themes.
Superintendent Carvalho, you mentioned the particulate matter in smoke. I wonder if part of the school's job now, I was just doing some research on lead paint in Milwaukee schools. Is there a lot of this toxicity that's lingering after the fire that you have to now worry about that is seeped into schools, whether it's from the smoke or, whatever, the burning microwaves and televisions, that even though the school itself wasn't touched, you have to deal with the toxicity?
Absolutely, and particularly in certain areas more than others. There are certain areas, certainly those closer to the fires, but areas where maybe they were not close to the fire, but because of the topography, there was a dense, prolonged concentration of smoke, particulate matter, and noxious fumes in that area for not just hours, but days. Yeah. And you have to believe that at some point gravity does its work and they're going to fall to the ground. And then if you monitor, as you said, after all of this, there were rains, and what happens? That will allow for some of those contaminants to go deeper into the ground. And this is the same ground that becomes the playground for kids in our communities. Look, I think that's why we're so lucky that I created recently a new entity within the school system that actually concentrates all of its attention to these issues. So we have now a chief who monitors environmental conditions around the school system, who informs not only best building practices, but also scrutinizes soil testing requirements, air filtration and air purifying investments, which we've made. We were actually already in process of installing air purification systems, next generation, and filtration systems in all of our classrooms. We expedited that work. Revamping and considering better technologies for HVAC systems in our schools, but also deploying new protocols for soil testing and air control testing. The air control is easier because of the deployment of these next generation sensors that we're doing across the board to ensure that what John described as really being an unacceptable condition, whether we're talking about hurricanes, to tsunamis, fires, what may be, government ought to work better. And government ought to talk better to other government. The fact that we had systems that imploded and all of a sudden our community became paralyzed is unacceptable. This is no longer a skill set deficit. It's not that we don't know what to do. It's a will set proposition, is that we know exactly what to do, what tools to use, what partnerships to engage, what to learn from the private sector and adopt, but we lack the will, the political will to actually do the right thing because there are too many special interests influencing the right decision. So yes, the issue of soil contamination, air testing has gone from just an incident happened and we are reacting to it to now something that is done as a matter of process for weeks, months, and years to come.
Let's open it up to questions now, all the way in the back.
Hi, thank you all. So we live in Los Angeles, and Superintendent, Thank you for leadership when there was very little of it. And thank you for your app. We used it. My question to you both is, what do you need to step on more toes?
Do we need to step on more
What do we need to step on more toes?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think people should have 14 toes during these times for us to step more. I think that what I just said, government, I employ 85,000 people. It's a massive budget, $20 billion a year. And there should be, and I take pride in the fact that we've established much closer protocols of communication partnership with the city and the county. But they need to be even better. And we need to stop seeing these as being public issues. This is public-private partnership at its best that will actually bring the best solutions. And politics cannot get in the way. Red tape often impairs and impacts the progress that we need to make. And we need to be better for the benefit of our community. We can do better than what we've seen. Just what you discussed, the notification system during the time of crisis to our community was an abomination, an abomination. Houses should have been saved. The response should have been better. The anticipatory leadership should have been there in a more forceful way as far as the response. And now we're doing, obviously, an autopsy. We're doing a post-mortem. But I have a feeling that we knew better. That's why I'm saying we're developing a new system. And I've reached out to other forms of government. Let's co-develop it. Let's ensure that our systems speak in a seamless way so that we're not caught in this predicament again.
Question here.
I want to have a quick answer to that question. I'm going to make it short, but we're doing something very antithetical to what you may think. We now sell to governments and utilities. Unified School District is a customer of ours, paying customer. SCE, PG&E, they're all buying. We're trying to help them change their systems, not just replace them. It is important to help them along.
Yep.
My name's Ivy, and not only am I a DACA recipient, formerly undocumented, but I also work for the state of California. I was thankfully and blissfully bonding with my newborn during January and February. But when I came back, was really seeing the state side and the frustration that I think you all are experiencing or expressing. And the politics and the toe-stepping and the bureaucracy, and it gets to a point where for someone who came from the private sector going into government with the hope of like affecting change, it's so difficult. It is so immensely difficult. So I think I want to flip the narrative a little bit and ask, like, what is that word of encouragement for some of us who have seen this work and know how hard it is? And honestly, it's just so hard to do easy things sometimes. Like, what is that change of, or reciprocal of almost the criticism that will help this work keep going? Because we do need to stay optimistic, and I think I'm personally asking as well. And I'm really looking forward to hearing some pearls of wisdom that will keep us going.
I can maybe
go, please, yeah.
So there's a bill going through Congress right now, the Fix Our Forest Act. It's one of the first bills to move even in this crazy time in DC, and it is designed around permit reform to make it easier to reduce fuels on federal land. That's not, now the fires in LA were just a hair away from being on federal land. They were not on federal land, but they could have just as easily been on federal land. And I think one change I think everyone in the community recognizes is needed is the way is reducing the barriers for fuels reduction. And there have been well-meaning environmentalists who have been slowing down the process of controlled burning and manual fuel reduction. And I do think one silver lining ray of hope that will come out of this horrific tragedy will be acknowledgement that we need to more aggressively reduce fuels.
Saket, the final word goes to you.
Well, you know, it does come back to good old-fashioned citizen organizing.
Yes.
I mean, there has to be a public demand for prevention, for safety, and for this kind of ecosystem. And in California, you have a particular opportunity to organize for massive public sector investment, state dollars, into prevention strategies so that cities and counties can invest in buying the app, in building the apprenticeship program that produces the workers, right? In scaling the model. Absolutely, 100%, the solutions are going to come from public-private partnerships. But the wind that we need for all of it, you know, what's going to make it all possible is large-scale public investment that can't happen without political will. And so we need to make resilience a large-scale issue that everybody talks about, not just the fire chief, not just the superintendent or the app developer, but this should be a kitchen table issue for everybody who has a home or knows someone who has a home.
And we'll end it there. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to all of the panelists.